Welcome to Orthodontic Smiles, the podcast designed for all dentists and their staffs who practice orthodontics. This podcast is brought to you by the American Orthodontic Society. Within the American Dental Association, there are quite a few true specialties. The one specialty that has grown the most and the fastest is the specialty of pediatric dentistry. These specialists are truly the pediatricians of dentistry, and each has had 2 years of additional training after dental school. From my personal experience as a pediatric dentist, I can tell you the training is intense, but oh so rewarding. The pediatric dentist cares for the child from birth all the way through adolescence. Preventive, growth and development, restorative care, and dentistry for special needs are all part of what we do every day. And in some practices, orthodontics is also part of this highly trained specialty. As a pediatric dentist, our lives are dedicated to the well-being and dental health of every child we treat. We all in this specialty realize it is an awesome responsibility. I shout out accolades to all my fellow members of the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry for the fine service they provide to God's greatest gifts, our children. To celebrate this specialty and to find out more about it, I would like to interview on Orthodontic Smiles today Dr. John S. Rutkauskas, the Executive Director of the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. I'd like to welcome today Dr. John Rutkauskas, the Executive Director of the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. We could not be in a more beautiful setting. We are in Kauai, Hawaii at the Grand Hyatt Spa in Kauai. He's just coming back from Honolulu, where he had, I understand, a fantastic meeting of the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. We're here after the meeting for a post course of the American Orthodontic Society, and we'll be talking a bunch at this particular meeting. We'll be talking about early treatment orthodontics. How was your meeting in Hawaii, John?
And well, aloha. In the spirit of this conversation, our meeting went extremely well. We had a near record attendance of almost 6,500 attendees. We had some of the best C.A.E. programming we've had in a very, very long time. We had some amazing social programs for our members, and all of our members, I do believe, walked away with the aloha feeling.
Great. Well, I tell you, I don't know how you don't get that feeling even here in Kauai. Everyone here has been so nice and at our beck and call for anything we want or need for our meeting. We've got 3 speakers at our meeting: Lenny Carapeza, Dr. Elsa Echeverria, and myself. And we thank you for coming. We think it's important, and I understand that next year you will be 20 years as the executive director.
That's absolutely right, Ed. 20 years has flown by like I never imagined. It's been such an absolute pleasure to be a part of this organization, which really focuses on one thing and one thing only. It's the betterment of children and the outcomes that they receive from our members as providers.
And speaking of members, have we not increased the number of members? It's incredible. I remember back when I first became a young pediatric dentist, and I hate to say it, 1975, there weren't very many pediatric dentists in the world. And now, how many?
Well, we have almost 11,000 members in the Academy. Around 8,000 or so are active practicing pediatric dentists. And you are so correct. The Academy has worked so hard over those decades to increase the number of pediatric dentists, in part because of the issues related to access to care for children around the country, our support in having pediatric dentists really delivering the message of a dental home and H1 visit, working with the children and hopefully optimizing their outcomes later in life.
Well, you've been pushing that idea of the dental home and the 1-year checkup for a while now, and I think it's starting to really take effect. I still run into pediatricians, though, I tell you, that haven't quite bought on to the subject, but I think it's going to take a little bit more time for them to finally acquiesce to what we know to be something that kids really need.
Well, Ed, your point's very well taken. We've been working very diligently, I would say at least for the last decade, in working with our pediatrician colleagues. They have taken this position of a dental home visit, but the message filtering out into the mainstream of pediatricians may not always have resonated. I think we need to be very diligent. I think we need to continue to work with them, recognizing that prevention is really at the core of what we do, and preventing dental disease, best way to do that is to get to the caregivers and the parents really early in life so they know and recognize some of the key events that may occur over that lifespan to prevent getting children into dental care and have them have a healthy outcome for the rest of their lives. I think it is really, really important.
John, you came from different background. You were a dentist, and then you took a position with a different organization. Who was that before you came to us?
I had the privilege of serving special care organizations for 9 years. So I had a great appreciation for the entire spectrum of patients with special needs, including children. I had the privilege in those 9 years of working with a number of pediatric dentists over the course of those 9 years who have a commitment as well as a passion for special needs. So it was a relatively natural transition for me to move from special care dentistry to the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, recognizing many of those key needs that they have as providers in delivering care to special needs children.
Well, you know, I come from probably a closer connection to that than most, because, and I'll put the little plug in here, we give in the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, we give an award, the Album Society Award, to honor his contribution to dentistry for the handicapped. He happened to have been my program director, so if there's anyone that knows about dentistry for the handicapped, it's all the residents that came out of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia under Dr. Manny Album. So we recognize him, and so I have a great empathy for the kids that come to me with special needs.
Well, he was a giant, and I had the privilege of meeting him as well. He has passed away since, but he was so passionate, so focused at a time where very few other providers really looking at this area and the significant need of special needs patients, that he really became an icon for many people, not only in pediatric dentistry, but those that were really focusing on special needs patients. Here we are a few decades later. I would really love to tell you that we've had a lot of progress in care of special needs patients, but it's been a very slow move. But what I can tell you is that within the Academy, we're increasingly focusing on this area because it is such a high need area. And we have many more pediatric dentists who are committed today than were in Manny Album's generation.
Yeah, back years ago, John, and you can remember this, back in even in the 70s, I mean, most patients with medically or physically compromised were in institutions, and they were dealt with in a not very pretty manner, especially with dentistry, because there really weren't there wasn't anybody there to really give them the care that they needed. And since that time, I think now we are able as pediatric dentists to really help those patients out. I mean, that has changed tremendously. And I look forward to the times when my patients with handicaps come in, because they're just wonderful. They build such a nice relationship with you over the years. I mean, I've been in practice for many years, and I've seen teenagers come in and now they're older than I am,
Well,
and they're still in my practice.
Ed, you raise a very interesting point, and that is we have trained our pediatric dentists increasingly to know, recognize, and open their practices to special needs patients. But what has happened has been that because of the lifespans and the quality of care, both medical and dental, that's been provided for these patients, they are living into adulthood and some into senescence. What we're challenged with today, Ed, is the fact that we work very hard to find a transitioning point for some of those adult patients, recognizing that as a pediatric dentist, treating a 60-year-old Down syndrome may not be in the core of what you do and are doing as a pediatric dentist. So one of the core areas right now that we're working on is finding and facilitating ways to be able to get these patients transitioned into, say, general practices that might be better accommodating for adult denticians in some of those problems. I think mainstreaming special needs patients in dental schools, and it hasn't occurred everywhere, but increasingly mainstreaming and exposing special needs patients at the dental school level will increasingly bring awareness and appreciation for some of those graduates in general practice who may later on in life be able to accommodate special needs adults.
Well, let me ask you this question, although it may not particularly pertain to dentistry for the handicapped. Are our young residents and young pediatric dentists that are just now getting into practice, are they limiting their ages? Because when I got started, I mean, we all looked at it as pediatricians, from birth to 18. And then when we refer our patients, I'm seeing so many now start to refer their patients out of their offices when they start 12, 13 years old.
Well, Ed, the core definition of the specialty of pediatric dentistry includes the entire spectrum of children, and we also have a qualifying statement in patients with special health care needs. What we are seeing somewhat increasingly is that a number of our providers are beginning to focus on the younger kids that are out there, and in particular the 0 to 3 segment, and we talked about the age 1 visit earlier in the dental home, is a critical point that I think needs to increasingly be focused on by pediatric dentists. And some are doing it. I think we need to find more, because that's really an entry point into the healthcare system for many of these families. And if our members can capture those individuals, not only from a practice management standpoint, but certainly over the lifetime of their childhood and adolescence, we can work really hard to find ourselves in a really good place with many of these patients when they reach early adulthood, with having good, strong denticians that can then help them into their adulthood and be strong oral health.
But I mean, is it to encompass the preventive part of practicing pediatric dentistry? Because that is a major part of what we do. As far as I'm concerned, it's the preventive part of what we do. And then so it stands to reason, at least in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong and whether or not we've changed our attitudes about this, and that is that sure, we'll see those patients from 0 to 3, provide for them what care they needed, whether it's infant decay, baby bottle, and restorative at that point. But once I've gotten that kind of care done for those children, boy, I'm struggling in making sure that preventively they're covered for all the way through till their teens. Because I find that kids get decay, and I know we all know this. Many kids get it when they're very young, and then they have a period of time wherein then that transition of teeth, and they're losing teeth, and the new ones haven't come in yet, and they really don't get that much decay then. And then all of a sudden, the permanent teeth come in. They're teenagers. They're into the Gatorades and all that kind of stuff, and now we're starting to see decay again. But the reason for my question was that I'm seeing those patients being transferred out of offices when really I think we need to be focusing on those kids so that they don't have restorative problems.
Oh, well, I very much agree with that insight. I think that while you may see some examples of what you're describing of referring out adolescents to general practices, my experience has been that many pediatric dentists continue to retain individuals through their adolescence and to some degree even into their adulthood, as you may have experienced yourself,
Sure.
my friend, that pediatric dentists are probably some of the best human beings that you might find, and dentistry and human beings hasn't always connected in a very positive way with popular culture, etc. But what we find is as these individuals head off to college, they're always typically begging to come back and
Absolutely.
see their pediatric dentist before they have been asked to transition into a general practice. And I think it is very important. And the earlier we get these kids into our offices, I think really improves our ability to try to get them into that lifetime.
It's a relationship
exactly
you form with kids. And that's why these teenagers that go off to college want to come in the summer times and get their teeth checked, because you formed a relationship. Years and years and years, 15, 18 years of seeing these kids, and they feel like part of the family, and we take care of them as our family and care for them. And I tell them to just come in, even if you don't need your teeth cleaned. I like to see what you're doing. I like to see, what are you studying in college? I feel they're part of me in my practice, and everyone in my office who's been with me loves the same feeling.
And I sense that your enthusiasm and your excitement around the family is, we're calling here in the Ono, here in Hawaii, is really part and parcel of that relationship that you have developed over those many years with your patients. And we see that with many of our members, and it's a wonderful culture to develop within anyone's practice.
It is. So tell me, what's the future of our organization, the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry?
I think our future is really good. I think our future has so much potential in so many ways. We have a lot of enthusiasm with our newly minted pediatric dentists. We are now producing over 450 pediatric dentists a year. Roughly about 15 years ago, it was half that mark or even less. And again, part of these initiatives in raising our graduate numbers is based on getting pediatric dentists in the communities that can really make a big difference, particularly for some of the underserved communities. There are some headwinds, however. One of the issues we are grappling with are some of the significant debt loads that our members are carrying. It's not unusual now to hear $300,000-$400,000 of debt load. And in fact, this weekend, I heard in a private meeting that one of our members has topped $1 million of debt in his learning past. And so these are some issues that are critical, I think, for us to deal with, recognize, and have a way to ameliorate some of the pressures, because I think that then in turn causes some pressures, including deciding on how an individual is going to practice, in what environment, what type of delivery systems, given those encumbrances that they have with the significant debt load. So we
changed the number of ethnicities that going into pediatric dentistry. The gender has changed tremendously. Has that presented any problems as far as employment is concerned?
Well, I would frame it as opportunities.
Oh, okay, I could say that.
You're absolutely accurate, Ed, that there's been considerable change in the demographic of our organization, but in a very positive way. I'd say we are increasingly growing significantly diverse, and I think that is wonderful in our society. For example, we have now roughly 60 to 65% of all incoming trainees into our residency programs are women. And that has flipped significantly from the day that you were coming out and practicing in the 70s.
We only had one one of our residents was a woman, and she moved to Israel.
Yeah, and that is but one example, and there are many examples of that. And so we're looking at, through the academy, we're looking through the lens of not only being a woman, if you will, entering a profession like pediatric dentistry, but also millennial and a number of the key elements that go into the way millennials think and act. The other issue that we recognize is that roughly 44% of our core membership now, men and women, are millennials. There's been a major infusion of the workforce
thanks to Heber Simmons.
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right. But again, we recognize that culturally, as things change, we have to adapt. And as baby boomers, I know that you and I are baby boomers. We're sort of now moving out as the largest core group of active individuals, and so we're refining our activities and values of how we work with our members to recognize some of the increasingly changing cultural views of our millennials.
Talk to us a little bit about Heber Simmons. I know that he's our congressional liaison from the American Academy, and he almost has single-handedly raised the number of pediatric dentists from the days of my graduation as a pediatric dentist to now. And tell us how he did that.
Heber is a personal hero of mine. I have to admit, and many individuals. He has been one of the most committed individuals to the development of our specialty that I've had the privilege of knowing the last 20 years. And you're absolutely correct. Heber has been our congressional liaison for literally a couple decades or more now, and has worked diligently on the leadership's initiatives, including recognizing the need to increase the number of pediatric dentists. So over those 20 plus years, Heber has, along with a core team of our public policy folks, including legislative policy group that we work with in Washington, increased the number of residency slots from, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, roughly 180 back in the late 90s to now over 450 trainees. Now, what I will say is we recently completed a workforce study, which will be published to our members and to the lay public later this fall. And what we've come to find is that I think we've found a landing spot in terms of total number of trainees. So Heber's efforts now have increasingly focused on using some of those federally funded dollars under Title VII to really focus on faculty loan repayment. And
that's what I was getting at. He was explaining to me that money is going to the educators so that we can have more residents in the programs.
Well, it's such a convoluted and complex conversation in that our academicians are not compensated, generally speaking, as much as what they might find in private practice. Given the debt loads that many of them have, the decision-making of going into academics or private practice becomes increasingly difficult given those disparities. So what this does, the faculty loan repayment, is replace some dollars for them to hopefully see a financial relief on some of their debt loads while they can still enjoy staying in the academic environment. And we are increasingly finding that the Title VII dollars are finding a good place to see young practitioners going back into academics because it is relieving their debts to a significant way.
Now, here we have all these new young pediatric dentists, millennials just coming out with tremendous debt. How do we get them all employed, and what do you see the trends are for them in the future?
The workforce study, which will be published, as I mentioned, later this fall, identifies a few things. One of which that while the number appears to be a good number, as I mentioned earlier, we've got about 8,000 active practicing pediatric dentists nationally. What we're finding is that it's become a distribution discussion. That is, high-density urban areas are seeing increasingly pediatric new graduates, pediatric dentists landing in those communities. What we're going to hopefully do is have an increasing conversation to say, look, you need to take and evaluate the community that you'll be landing in, because there will be some that are oversaturated with fellow pediatric dentists, but there are certainly many communities still in need of pediatric dentists around the country. And it becomes ultimately a lifestyle decision. We understand that, family decisions, etc. But we need to have our folks know and recognize that there are still communities out there that hopefully some of them will find attractive to be able to get into those
Have we
communities.
worked with government to help offset some of those differences in pay and participation in let's say indigent areas?
Well, we've had some conversations about health shortage areas, which are designated areas by the federal government in finding workforce to go into with debt relief, etc. Those are ongoing conversations. I think where currently, at least, we're focusing on is, at the very least, identifying and putting focus on the fact that when a pediatric dentist makes a decision to go in a particular community, the decision making has to also include an economic analysis of the viability of their own practices and abilities. And so we're hoping that in context of this conversation, we can show some of the communities that are still available in high density states, for example, in Florida and in California, that there still are indeed communities that they can land in.
Absolutely.
And
Central Florida is very underserved. Where the beaches are, there's plenty of pediatric.
Well, and not to be flip about this conversation, but we encourage many of our members to live in those beachfront communities and be able to go into the areas like Central Florida and be able to practice. There are, I think, ways that can facilitate having practitioners.
It's a dilemma, isn't it? Because they're coming out of their residency programs in such debt, and then we're asking them to go into indigent areas where their income will probably be less if they go into those areas. But so there's a real discrepancy in that happening. It seems to me that they're filling their positions going directly into corporate dentistry. Mm-hmm. And that it may be their only way out of that debt, is taking jobs immediately in corporate dentistry.
Just to go back to your earlier comment, and then I'll circle to the conversation around corporate dentistry. There are communities that are underserved that are not necessarily indigent communities.
Correct. I agree.
And I think going into some of those communities, certainly there's going to be a mixed profile of individuals that are going to be parties to your practice. And I think it's really finding those communities to be able to have a balanced practice scope to be able to help in the
I wasn't alluding to the fact that if you happen to go into a rural area, it was definitely going to be indigent. But as speaking as Florida, there are some areas in the Okeechobee Lake area where it is significantly indigent, and really none to mention the fact that there's no pediatric dentist there. There's not even any dentist there at all.
Well, we're on the other side of this conversation. We have invested a lot of resources, and Heber Simmons has himself been a big advocate for, excuse me, is federally funded programming,
right,
like Medicaid, and that's another piece to this conversation when we talk about serving indigent communities. And we've seen better successes in some places, lesser successes, but we continue as an academy to work with the federal government to be certain that they put the correct amount of resources into Medicaid funding to allow
it's
us
constantly a battle,
to serve. It is. But it is, absolutely. And just to circle back with the conversation around corporate dentistry, I think you're absolutely correct that a number of our graduates with these significant debt loads are finding an option in corporate dentistry that at least immediately provides them the cash flows to be able to sustain at least those early year or years of their practice before they make more definitive decisions about how they want to practice. I will say, while this is anecdotal, we're seeing really a window right now of 3 to 5 years that some individuals are opting to go into corporate dentistry, but when they reach that 3 to 5 year window threshold, we're finding that they're transitioning. Many of them are transitioning back into the more traditional practice models of private practice, group practice. They've gotten some experience now. They've gotten some cash flows coming into them. Now they're beginning to feel some relief in their financial debt loads that they can make decisions otherwise they may have made coming out of dental school. So all these trends clearly are predicated on the fact that we're still, when it comes to corporate dentistry, relatively early in the life cycle of that practice model. And so many of these things literally are playing out as we speak right now, not necessarily knowing how it's going to ultimately fall. But we think that there will be a segment, a permanent segment, where corporate dentistry will be part and parcel of the delivery care system. What segment it may be, some say as much as 20%, but that still means that there could be as much as 80 to 90% in the more traditional delivery models. And part of that will be based on how healthcare is going to ultimately be compensated for, again, going back to Medicaid and some of the other third-party coverage plans.
Well, it's said that in the next 10 years, only 5% of practitioners in dentistry, and I'm not just speaking about pediatric dentistry, will no longer be in solo practice.
Well, there are a lot of data sources that I've seen, and it's sort of across the front. But I also want to say that not all corporate models are necessarily created equal. There are some corporate models that we've seen that have not been very good delivery systems, particularly for children. We've seen others that have been a little bit better in terms of their approaches, and so it also the corporate model spans a whole spectrum of philosophies, and the one thing that we always insist on as an academy is that we're not necessarily going to suggest or prescribe, and we can't do legally how dentistry is going to be delivered, but if it's a for-profit model, profits cannot trump the best interest of what is for that child. So the care that's delivered under any delivery system has to be the same high level of care that we would expect based on our guidelines, on our policies, and solely based on the best interest of that child.
In every specialty, I think we all feel the same way. And at pediatric dentistry, we're dealing with the most precious things that God has put on this face of the earth, and that's children. And I want to thank you, John, for being with us. This has been a pleasure to sit here and talk with you about my love of pediatric dentistry, and I've devoted all my life to it, and I want to thank you for enlightening me about some of the new things and how you feel and how the Academy feels about what the future has to hold for pediatric dentistry. Thank you. This is your host, Dr. Ed Gonzalez. I want to thank you for listening to Orthodontic Smiles today. If you enjoyed our broadcast, please click the subscribe button. We'll be in touch with you in the future about our further broadcasts. Thanks for listening.